Dr. Gieseke, can I ask you to make your opening statement, please?
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us.
A few observations that are completely my own. I'm not representing anyone in this meeting. I used to, like you said, work for Sweden. I'm now just Johann Gieseke. Okay, my first point. I think we should wait at least a year before we start comparing country strategies. This epidemic is only in its start, in its beginning right now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, good. So everyone is now comparing how did country X do and how did country Y do, and I think that's too early. The epidemic is still evolving as we speak. Second, even a soft lockdown like we have had in Sweden can be quite effective, and I think it could be effective in other countries as well, where you trust people and rely more on voluntary measures than on laws and regulations. People are not stupid. If you tell them what they should do to protect themselves and to protect others, they will generally follow what you tell them without any policing in the streets and so on. Do not build your strategy on the imminent advent of a vaccine. We might have to wait for it, and it may not be very effective in those who need it most. If you compare to flu vaccine, for example, which works less or not so well in old people as in young people. I think you should allow a controlled spread of the disease for people below 60, but concentrate on the old and frail, and that should really be intensive. Testing staff, testing the patients frequently, send home anyone who works there and who has a slightest symptom of infection, and be very intense in the way you protect the old and frail people in care homes. There should now be intensive contact tracing, identification of contacts, testing of contacts, probably home isolation of contacts, and that's where we should concentrate our efforts to combat this virus, the old and the frail. People below 60, allow a moderate or tolerable spread of the disease in that age group. Keep your schools open. Sweden has done that all the time, and it's interesting as an aside that Finland locked its schools and Sweden did not. And there was a comparison about a month ago, a number of school children having been infected in Sweden and in Finland, and there's no difference at all. We should all realize, and I think this is important, that the epidemic itself, as well as the countermeasures, hurt marginalized people most. It's the poor and the marginalized who will hurt most from the epidemic and from the lockdowns and whatever measures we propose. One thing that has not been mentioned very much, I think, is the threat to democracy that are raised by this epidemic, where strong people in many countries have assumed power that they didn't have before, and that they might not yield at the end of this. So keep an eye on that. Also, COVID is sometimes regarded as a mystical, supernatural disease. It is a viral respiratory infection with its own characteristics, but it is a respiratory viral infection. We have seen many of those. It's not something completely new, COVID. And finally, one word of caution. COVID has surprised us many times over these last 7-8 months and may yet do that again. Okay, that's my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you. Before moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Gieseke, in your introductory remarks, you talked about protecting nursing homes and protecting the elderly. If COVID is widespread in the community, or is at least spreading in the community, is it simply inevitable that it's going to make its way to older people and into nursing homes, or is there a way to stop that happening?
It is inevitable. It will spread, but we should try to keep that spread as low as possible and concentrate much of what we're doing on that area. Because in Sweden, the majority of people who died are in care homes of some kind. Frequent testing, contact tracing, being very aggressive about keeping control on what's happening in the care homes. I think that, and it's a lot of work. It's not 100% useful, but it would bring down the number of deaths, which I would say is the main aim of our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, to bring in Dr. Gieseke.
I agree, and I think in the future there will be much less national restrictions and national action, and much more local. Like two others have said, to take local action, to study the epidemiology locally, and be much more prepared to change that in small places than the country. I think the national restrictions have sort of overlived their time. It must be much more. The work should be much more local in the future. Over.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
A very small, tiny proportion of people over 60 are in care homes. So for all of the other population over 60 who are living completely full lives and working and living the same as everybody else, what would it entail?
I think they should, even harder than others, adhere to the rules about minimizing contact, keeping distance, washing hands, staying at home if you feel ill, and so on. They should do that even more than the rest of the population. Over.
You mentioned the soft voluntary lockdown may be quite effective. Could you elaborate on it, and what would a soft lockdown be?
There's no law telling people to stay at home, and the police will not pick you up if you're in the street when you shouldn't be in the street. But it's just telling people what they should do with distancing, with hand washing, with staying home and so on, self-isolation if you feel sick. And you can actually estimate that the number of, mid-March, when the government introduced these measures, you could calculate that the number of potentially infectious contacts between people in Sweden dropped by 70%, just voluntary, no law. People did what they were asked to do, and they have continued to. One thing that's good with the Swedish strategy is that we haven't changed anything for the 6 months, whereas other countries are going in and out of lockdowns and restrictions, and which countries you can fly to and which countries you cannot fly to.